March 4, 1943. The underground laboratory at Shoebury Ness Testing Range, Essex, England. Dr. Edgar Wyndham adjusted his protective goggles as he examined the captured German Tiger tank armor plate mounted on the testing rig. The plate, 30 centimeters square and 8 centimeters thick, had arrived 3 days earlier, smuggled out of occupied France by the resistance. His team had worked for 72 hours straight, running unprecedented metallurgical tests while senior officers demanded immediate answers. The acrid smell of chemicals hung in the air as Wyndham peered through his microscope at the polished cross-section. "Impossible," he whispered, adjusting the focus. "Johnson, look at this." His assistant leaned in, squinting. "What am I seeing, sir?" "Molybdenum deficiency and something else." Wyndham's voice trailed off as he made calculations on his notepad. His hands trembled slightly as the implications became clear. Behind them, Colonel Harrison paced impatiently. "Well, what can you tell me about their armor? Our boys are dying out there while you're staring at metal chips." Wyndham straightened his back, removed his glasses, and turned to the officer. "Sir, I believe we found something that could change everything about how we engage their tanks." The laboratory fell silent as the engineers exchanged glances. The discovery in that basement laboratory would remain classified for decades, but in the hands of British gunners facing the feared German panzers, it would rewrite the rules of armored warfare on the European battlefield. No one in the War Office could have predicted that one scientist's unauthorized metallurgical experiments would provide the key to defeating Germany's most fearsome weapons. Edgar Wyndham had grown up in Birmingham, the son of a toolmaker. From childhood, he had been fascinated by his father's workshop, the smells of oil and metal, the precise measurements, the transformation of raw materials into functional objects. Their modest home in the industrial heart of England wasn't filled with luxuries, but it overflowed with curiosity. His father would bring home metal scraps and damaged tools, challenging young Edgar to determine why they had failed. "Understanding failure," his father would say, "is the first step to creating success." At school, Edgar showed exceptional aptitude for mathematics and chemistry, earning a scholarship to Cambridge in 1926. There, he specialized in metallurgy, publishing his thesis on steel crystallization under varying temperature conditions. After graduation, he joined the research division of Birmingham Steel Works, where he developed improved methods for measuring stress tolerances. His innovations saved the company thousands of pounds and earned him recognition within the industry, but Edgar remained largely unknown outside specialized circles. He married Margaret Fletcher, a librarian he met while researching historical metallurgical techniques, and they settled into a comfortable life in a modest home near the university. When war clouds gathered in 1939, Wyndham was 41, too old for conscription, but his expertise made him valuable in other ways. The Ministry of Supply recruited him to join a secret research team focused on armor development and analysis. Leaving his wife and 2 children behind, Edgar reported to the classified facility at Shoebury Ness, where the British military tested weapons and armor. The team he joined was an eclectic mixture of academics, industrial engineers, and military personnel. Initially, the older military men viewed the civilian scientists with skepticism. Major Wallace Thornton, who oversaw the facility, made no attempt to hide his disdain. "We need practical solutions, Dr. Wyndham, not academic theories," he said during their first meeting. "Our boys are facing German steel, not German ideas." Wyndham simply nodded and got to work. He understood that respect would come through results, not arguments. The first 6 months were grueling, 18-hour days analyzing British armor composition and developing improved formulations. His methodical approach and innovative testing techniques gradually earned the grudging respect of his military colleagues, particularly after his recommendations for adjusting the manganese content in tank armor resulted in a 17% improvement in ballistic resistance. By mid-1941, Wyndham had become an essential member of the team, though he remained uncomfortable with military hierarchy and protocol. His habit of asking questions without regard for rank occasionally created tension, but his results spoke for themselves. What no one yet realized was that Edgar's true value wouldn't come from improving British armor, but from understanding the enemies. The team had seen reports from the battlefields, particularly from North Africa, where British tanks were being devastated by German armor and anti-tank weapons. What they lacked was direct access to German materials for analysis. Intelligence reports and battlefield observations could only tell them so much. If only we could get our hands on actual samples, Wyndham had remarked during a late-night session with his team. Without that, we're just making educated guesses. His assistant, Henry Johnson, a brilliant young metallurgist from Manchester, nodded in agreement. The ministry considers it impossible. Wyndham had smiled slightly. My father always said that impossible was simply a challenge that hadn't met the right person yet. He had no idea that soon his expertise would be tested against actual German armor, and that his discoveries would challenge everything the Allied forces thought they knew about the invincible German panzers. The European theater of World War II had been dominated by armored warfare since the German Blitzkrieg swept through Poland and France in 1939 and 1940. The German panzer divisions, with their coordinated tactics and superior tanks, had revolutionized modern warfare, leaving Allied forces scrambling to catch up technically and tactically. By early 1943, the battlefield situation had grown increasingly dire. The Afrika Korps under General Erwin Rommel had pushed British forces back across North Africa, utilizing superior tank technology and anti-tank weapons. The feared German Tiger I tanks had first appeared in Tunisia in December 1942, shocking Allied forces with their seemingly impenetrable armor and powerful 88mm guns. Standard British anti-tank weapons bounced harmlessly off the Tiger's thick plates, while the German tanks could destroy British armor from well beyond the effective range of British tank guns. In the Soviet Union, the massive tank battles at Stalingrad had demonstrated the critical importance of armored warfare on the Eastern Front. The Soviets had suffered catastrophic losses, though their T-34 tanks had proven surprisingly effective. British intelligence was particularly interested in understanding why Soviet anti-tank tactics sometimes succeeded where British efforts failed, despite using similar projectiles and explosive formulas. The War Office had created the Special Armor Assessment Unit, codenamed Ironclad, headquartered at Shoeburyness, but with mobile teams that could examine captured equipment in the field. Officially, the unit focused on improving British tank design and armor composition. Unofficially, they had begun a desperate effort to understand and exploit weaknesses in German tank design, if such weaknesses existed. The 21st Army Group, under General Bernard Montgomery, was preparing for the eventual Allied invasion of Europe, knowing they would face the full might of Germany's armored divisions. Field reports indicated that the newer German tanks, particularly the Tigers and Panthers, seemed virtually invulnerable to frontal attacks. British tank crews were instructed to avoid direct engagement with German heavy tanks unless they had at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage, and even then, casualties were extreme. Colonel James Harrison, the stern career military man who oversaw Ironclad, had served in the First World War and understood the human cost of technological disadvantage. "Gentlemen," he told the assembled engineers and scientists in February 1943, "this is not an academic exercise. Every day we spend seeking answers, more of our boys die in burning tanks. Germany is producing armor we cannot penetrate with weapons we cannot match. Your job is to find their weakness and I expect you to find it quickly." The pressure was enormous, but the team had little to work with. They had examined photographs, studied reports, and analyzed fragments recovered from battlefields. But they needed intact samples of the latest German armor to conduct proper metallurgical analysis. Military intelligence considered it unlikely that such samples could be obtained, as the Germans were careful to destroy or recover damaged tanks. The political situation added further complexity. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had been pressing for more effective anti-tank weapons, making personal inquiries into the progress of armor research. The United States had entered the war but was still ramping up production and developing their own tank designs. Soviet requests for technical information sharing had been met with hesitation due to security concerns, despite the alliance of necessity. In this climate of urgency and limited information, the engineers at Shoebury-Ness worked tirelessly, knowing that solving this puzzle could save thousands of lives and potentially turn the tide of the European ground war. What they didn't know was that a solution was already en route, smuggled across occupied France by resistance fighters who had managed to cut a section of armor from a disabled Tiger tank before German recovery teams arrived. The arrival of the German armor sample at Shoebury-Ness on March 1, 1943, set off a flurry of activity. The section, measuring roughly 30 centimeters square and weighing over 40 kilograms, was immediately placed under guard in the main laboratory. Colonel Harrison had assembled the entire ironclad team for an emergency briefing. This piece of Tiger armor was obtained at great cost, Harrison informed them, his voice grave. 3 French resistance fighters died to get it across the channel. I don't need to tell you its value. Wyndham studied the dark gray metal plate with intense interest. It represented the first opportunity to properly analyze the newest German tank armor, not from fragments or reports, but a complete undamaged section from the front glacis plate of a Tiger eye. "You have 72 hours, Harrison continued. The Prime Minister himself has requested preliminary findings by the end of the week. Dr. Wyndham, you'll lead the analysis team." As the meeting dispersed, Major Thornton pulled Harrison aside, speaking in hushed tones that Wyndham could still overhear. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't Baldwin lead this? He has military experience, and this is too important for civilian scientists," Harrison interrupted. "Baldwin is a fine engineer, but Wyndham has the best metallurgical mind in Britain. I want results, not protocol." Wyndham pretended not to hear as he began organizing the testing schedule. He divided his team into 3 groups: chemical analysis, structural testing, and microscopic examination, with each to work in 8-hour shifts around the clock. Johnson would assist him directly with the most crucial tests. "We'll begin with non-destructive testing," Wyndham instructed. "X-ray diffraction, hardness testing, and magnetic analysis. Then we'll cut test sections for chemical composition and microstructure examination." Lieutenant Baldwin, the military engineer who had expected to lead the project, approached Wyndham with barely concealed resentment. "What do you need from my team, Doctor?" Wyndham looked up from his notes. "Baldwin, I'd like you to oversee the penetration testing once we've completed the initial analysis. Your ballistics experience will be invaluable." The acknowledgment seemed to soften Baldwin's demeanor slightly. "Very good. I'll prepare the testing range." As the team dispersed to their assignments, Wyndham carefully examined the plate's surface under strong light. He noted unusual discoloration patterns along the edges, something he hadn't expected. "Johnson, look at this coloration. What does it suggest to you?" The younger engineer studied the bluish tint. "Heat treatment irregularity?" "Possibly. Make that our first microscopic priority." The first 24 hours yielded interesting but inconclusive results. The armor's hardness tested at Brunel 520, significantly harder than British tank armor. Chemical analysis confirmed the expected high carbon content with chromium and manganese alloy additions. "It's impressive engineering," Johnson remarked as they reviewed the preliminary data. "The Germans have achieved excellent hardness without making the steel too brittle." Wyndham nodded but seemed unsatisfied. "Yes, but something doesn't add up. The magnetic signature shows inconsistencies that the chemical composition doesn't explain." By the second day, fatigue was setting in. The team worked in rotating shifts, but Wyndham and Johnson barely left the laboratory, snatching brief naps on cots brought in for the purpose. They had cut small sections from the plate for microscopic analysis, carefully preserving the majority of the sample for ballistics testing. It was during the microscopic examination that Wyndham first noticed something unusual. "Johnson, look at this crystal structure. Do you see these formations along the grain boundaries?" Johnson peered into the microscope. "Carbon precipitation? Yes, but the pattern is wrong. It suggests rapid cooling followed by—" "Wait." Wyndham's voice took on a new intensity. "We need to test for molybdenum content." Johnson looked surprised. "Molybdenum? The preliminary chemical analysis didn't show significant levels." "Exactly." Wyndham was already reaching for his notes. "Run the test again, specifically looking for molybdenum depletion zones." The new tests confirmed Wyndham's suspicion. The armor showed evidence of molybdenum deficiency, particularly near the surface layers. This finding alone was interesting, but didn't explain the armor's renowned strength. The real breakthrough came at hour 65, when Wyndham was examining the microstructure under polarized light. "My God," he whispered. "Johnson, look at this face-centered cubic structure. They've achieved martensite formation, but there's something wrong with the crystal alignment." Johnson studied the sample. "It's uniform at the macro level, but shows misalignment at the micro level. What does that mean?" Wyndham's mind was racing. "It means they've sacrificed long-term structural integrity for immediate hardness. These microfractures, they're invisible to standard testing, but under repeated stress." He trailed off, calculating possibilities. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Wyndham called the team together. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but there was an undeniable excitement in his voice. "We've found something significant, High Tom," he told them. "The German armor has a fundamental flaw in its crystal structure, a result of their manufacturing process. They've optimized for hardness at the expense of certain types of stress resistance." Baldwin looked skeptical. "But it's still stopping our shells." "Yes," Wyndham agreed, "because we're hitting it wrong." Harrison had entered the laboratory during this exchange. "Explain, Doctor. What do you mean, hitting it wrong?" "Yeah." Wyndham turned to face the colonel, knowing that what he was about to propose would challenge established tactical doctrine. "Sir, I believe I know how to defeat the Tiger's armor, but you're not going to like it because it means changing everything about how our tanks engage the enemy." The tension in the room was palpable. No one spoke as Harrison fixed Wyndham with an evaluating stare. "Go on," he said finally. "I'm listening." July 10th, 1943, near Gela, Sicily. Lieutenant James Fairchild of the 7th Armored Division crouched behind his disabled Sherman tank, listening to the ominous rumble of approaching German armor. The invasion of Sicily had begun just 2 days earlier, and already his company had lost 4 tanks to enemy fire. The midday sun baked the dusty Sicilian landscape as Fairchild conferred with his gunner, Sergeant Mike Collins. "Remember the briefing?" Fairchild said, wiping sweat from his brow. "If it's a Tiger, we don't hit it head-on." Collins nodded grimly. "The new firing sequence. Seems crazy, sir." "Crazy or not, it's orders." 3 weeks earlier, every Allied tank crew had received a classified briefing based on findings from the Shoebury-Ness laboratory. The instructions contradicted everything they had been taught about tank warfare, and many veterans had been openly skeptical. The distinctive sound of the Tiger's engine grew louder as it approached their position. Fairchild's radio man, Private Wilson, whispered from inside the turret, "Another Sherman from C Company just got hit half a kilometer east. They say there are 3 Tigers moving our way." Fairchild made his decision. "Get back in. We're repositioning." Despite its damaged track, the Sherman's engine still functioned. They couldn't move far, but they could rotate to a better firing position. Fairchild guided his crew as they maneuvered behind a low stone wall, offering minimal cover, but a clear shot at the road where the Tigers would likely appear. "Load the special sequence," Fairchild ordered. "Remember, rapid succession, same impact point." Collins loaded the standard American 75mm shell. "Ready, sir." Minutes later, the first Tiger appeared around the bend. 45 tons of German engineering, its massive 88mm gun sweeping the landscape. Through his binoculars, Fairchild could make out the commander in the open turret, scanning for targets. "Range?" he asked. 600 meters, Collins replied. "We'll only get one chance." Fairchild took a deep breath. "Target the lower right side of the front plate near the driver's position. Fire when ready." Collins aligned the shot and pulled the trigger. The Sherman shuddered as the shell erupted from its barrel. Through the periscope, Fairchild watched the round strike exactly where intended. As expected, it didn't penetrate, merely left a dark mark on the Tiger's armored hide. The Tiger immediately turned toward them, its massive gun beginning to traverse in their direction. "Reload! Same spot," Fairchild ordered. Collins slammed another shell into the breech with practiced efficiency. "Ready! Fire!" The second shell hit within centimeters of the first impact point. Still no penetration, but Fairchild noticed a subtle discoloration spreading from the impact site. The Tiger had spotted them now. They had seconds before its superior gun would find its mark. "Third shell! Now!" Fairchild's voice was tense but controlled. Collins fired again. The third shell struck the same location, and this time something extraordinary happened. Where the previous shells had merely dented the armor, this one punched through, creating a shower of sparks and metal fragments. "Hit!" Collins shouted in disbelief. Through his periscope, Fairchild watched as smoke began pouring from the Tiger's hatches. Its massive bulk ground to a halt as the crew attempted to escape the burning interior. "My God," Wilson whispered. "It actually worked." Fairchild couldn't believe his eyes. His Sherman, outgunned, out-armored, and partially disabled, had just destroyed one of Germany's most feared weapons. The briefing had been right. The Tiger's armor had failed exactly as predicted by the engineers at Shoebury-Ness. As reports came in from across the battlefield, Fairchild learned that his crew wasn't alone. Other Sherman units employing the new tactics were reporting unprecedented success against German armor. The carefully guarded secret, the specific vulnerability of German tank armor to repeated stress at the same impact point, had transformed the battlefield equation. For the first time since facing the Tigers, Allied tankers began to believe they had a fighting chance. Back in England, Edgar Wyndham received the initial battle reports with measured satisfaction. His discovery had been implemented faster than he'd ever imagined possible, though not exactly in the way he had recommended. The nature of his findings had sparked intense debate among military commanders. What Wyndham had discovered during those 72 hours of testing was both surprising and counterintuitive. The German armor plate, renowned for its hardness, contained a fatal flaw in its crystalline structure, a result of wartime manufacturing compromises and material shortages. "The Germans have prioritized hardness over flexibility," he had explained to Colonel Harrison. "Their production process creates a face-hardened surface that's extremely resistant to single high-velocity impacts. But the underlying crystal structure contains microfractures that propagate under repeated stress." Harrison had frowned. "In plain English, Doctor." "Their armor is like glass, sir, extremely hard but potentially brittle. A single impact from our current shells won't penetrate it. But multiple impacts at the exact same point create a stress pattern that causes catastrophic failure of the crystal structure." Baldwin had interjected skeptically. That's theoretically interesting, but practically impossible. No gunner can hit the same spot 3 times in combat conditions. Wyndham had been prepared for this objection. That's why we need to change our ammunition, not just our tactics. I propose a multi-stage shell, one that delivers 3 separate impact events in rapid succession before the armor can dissipate the stress energy. This suggestion had led to heated debate. Developing and manufacturing a new type of artillery shell would take months, time they didn't have. Instead, a compromise was reached. Tank crews would be instructed to target the same spot on enemy armor with rapid sequential firing. When the first results came in from Sicily, showing a nearly 40% improvement in Tiger kill rates, Wyndham felt vindicated. But he also understood the limitations of the tactical solution. His lab continued working on the multi-impact shell design, which would eventually become the APDS M3 Crackerjack round, named for its ability to crack the toughest German armor. By August 1943, Wyndham's laboratory had expanded to include production specialists and ballistics experts. They had refined their understanding of the German metallurgical weakness and developed more effective exploitation methods. British and American factories began recalibrating their manufacturing processes to produce shells specifically designed to take advantage of the discovered flaw. The most challenging aspect had been keeping the discovery secret. If German intelligence learned that their armor vulnerability had been identified, they would surely modify their manufacturing process. The official explanation for improved Allied tank performance was credited to better crew training and tactical coordination. Meanwhile, Wyndham's team expanded their research to examine captured Panther tanks, which showed similar but less pronounced vulnerabilities. The Germans, facing material shortages and production pressures, had made consistent compromises in their metallurgical quality control. In September, Wyndham received a visitor, Major General Leslie McNair, from the United States Army, who oversaw America's armored force development. Their meeting lasted 5 hours, with Wyndham explaining the detailed technical findings and their battlefield implications. "Dr. Wyndham," McNair said finally, "this changes our entire approach to tank development. We've been racing to match German armor thickness, but you've shown us a smarter path." This conversation would later influence the development of the American M26 Pershing tank, which sacrificed some armor thickness for better metallurgical properties and greater speed. The Wyndham Principle, as it became known in classified technical circles, maintained that optimal armor was not necessarily the hardest or thickest, but the one with the best microstructural integrity under battlefield conditions. By early 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, the practical applications of Wyndham's discovery had been fully integrated into training and equipment design. The Germans, noticing the declining effectiveness of their heavy tanks, attributed the change to improved Allied guns rather than any fundamental flaw in their armor. When the Normandy landings began on June 6, 1944, Allied forces faced the feared German armor with a secret weapon that couldn't be seen: the knowledge of exactly how to make the invincible Tigers and Panthers vulnerable. This knowledge, born in an underground laboratory from one scientist's meticulous observation, would save countless Allied lives and help turn the tide of the European campaign. The full impact of Wyndham's discovery became apparent during the heavy fighting in the Normandy bocage country in June and July 1944. The dense hedgerows and narrow lanes of the Norman countryside had initially favored German defensive tactics, with well-positioned Panthers and Tigers decimating Allied tank columns forced to advance along predictable routes. Captain Richard Winters of the 3rd Armored Division had lost 8 Shermans during a single engagement near St. Lo before implementing the Wyndham Protocol, the classified firing procedure that had spread through Allied armored units. In a detailed after-action report, he described the transformation, Our column encountered 2 Panthers and a Tiger at the intersection near Martinville. Under previous doctrine, this would have necessitated retreat or acceptance of severe casualties. Instead, we implemented Pattern Delta, 3 Shermans targeting each German tank, with each Sherman firing 3 rounds in rapid succession at identical impact points. The results were remarkable. All 3 enemy tanks were neutralized with the loss of only 1 Sherman. The German commander captured afterward expressed complete bewilderment at our sudden ability to penetrate their armor. This pattern repeated across the Normandy battlefields, gradually shifting the psychological advantage. German tank commanders, once confident in their vehicles' near invulnerability, became increasingly hesitant to engage Allied formations directly. Intelligence reports noted a significant change in German armor tactics, with Tigers and Panthers being held back from direct engagement, a complete reversal of previous doctrine. By August 1944, the first production batches of the specialized APDS M3 crackerjack shells began reaching frontline units. These rounds, the direct result of Wyndham's research, contained a staged penetration system that delivered multiple impacts to the same point within milliseconds, exploiting the crystalline vulnerability of German armor without requiring gunners to hit the same spot repeatedly. Sergeant Thomas Jenkins of the 7th Armored Division recorded in his diary, "Use the new magic shells today against a Tiger outside Falaise. 1 hit, just 1, and the beast cracked open like an egg. If we'd had these from the start, we'd be in Berlin by now." The German response came in late 1944, though they never fully understood the nature of the Allied advantage. Believing that the improved Allied performance stemmed from better guns rather than exploitation of a metallurgical flaw, they began adding supplemental armor plates to their tanks, which ironically sometimes made the crystalline failure more catastrophic when it occurred. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the effectiveness of Wyndham's discovery faced its ultimate test. The German offensive deployed heavy concentrations of Tigers and Panthers in a desperate push through the Ardennes. Despite initial breakthroughs, the German advance stalled as Allied armor, employing both the tactical protocols and specialized ammunition, destroyed the attacking Panthers and Tigers at an unprecedented rate. Colonel Heinrich Müller, commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Division's Tank Regiment, noted in his captured battle journal, "Something fundamental has changed in the American ability to engage our armor. Tanks that should be impervious to their guns are being destroyed with a single hit. It's as if they suddenly discovered an invisible seam in our armor." By January 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, the once fearsome German armored divisions had been reduced to scattered battle groups. The psychological impact was perhaps even greater than the physical. German tank crews, once proud of their superior vehicles, now approached engagements with fatalistic resignation. Lieutenant Karl Schmid, a captured Tiger commander, told his interrogators, "We used to say 10 Shermans for 1 Tiger. Then suddenly it became 3 shots from 1 Sherman kills 1 Tiger." The change happened so quickly that many of us thought the Americans must have secretly deployed an entirely new weapon. The truth, that the weapon was knowledge rather than technology, remained classified long after the war ended. The Windham Protocol saved an estimated 7,000 Allied tank crewmen who would otherwise have perished facing German heavy armor. More significantly, it helped shorten the European war by enabling faster Allied advances in the crucial months following D-Day. For Edgar Wyndham, the war's end brought mixed emotions. The knowledge that his work had saved thousands of lives provided profound satisfaction. Yet the nature of his contribution meant that public recognition was impossible due to ongoing security concerns. In January 1945, Wyndham had been quietly awarded the King's Medal for service in the cause of freedom, presented in a private ceremony attended only by his family and a few senior officials. The citation deliberately obscured the specific nature of his contribution, referring only to critical metallurgical research with significant battlefield applications. After the war, Wyndham declined offers to continue military research. "I've seen enough of my science used to destroy," he told Johnson during their final meeting at Shoeburyness. "I'd like to build things now." He returned to Birmingham, accepting a professorship at the university and focusing on metallurgical applications for post-war reconstruction. His research into stress patterns in steel helped improve building techniques for the new structures replacing those destroyed in the Blitz. Few of his students ever knew the pivotal role their soft-spoken professor had played in defeating Hitler's armored legions. In 1953, Wyndham received an unexpected visitor, James Fairchild, now a civilian engineer with a Michigan automotive company. "I commanded a Sherman in Sicily and France," Fairchild explained. "They never told us who figured out how to kill tigers, but I tracked it down. I wanted to thank you. Your discovery saved my crew many times over." Wyndham, uncomfortable with praise, merely nodded. It was a team effort. "My gunner Collins lost his brother at Kasserine Pass, killed when his Sherman couldn't penetrate a tiger's armor after your discovery." Well, Collins got a kind of justice for his brother, knocked out 7 German tanks himself. Such visits were rare but meaningful to Wyndham. Occasionally he would receive letters from former tank commanders or gunners who had somehow learned of his role. He kept these in a small wooden box in his study, his only souvenirs from the war years. The technical details of Wyndham's discovery remained classified until 1977, long after most German and Allied World War II tank designs had become obsolete. When finally declassified, the Wyndham Report on Crystalline Vulnerabilities in Face-Hardened Armor became required reading at military engineering academies worldwide, influencing modern armor design philosophy. Perhaps the most profound legacy came in the form of the material science revolution that followed. The detailed understanding of microstructural behavior under stress conditions led to advances in everything from bridge construction to aircraft design. The manufacturing flaws Wyndham had identified in German armor, born of wartime expediency and material shortages, served as object lessons for generations of engineers about the dangers of compromising metallurgical integrity for immediate performance gains. Edgar Wyndham passed away quietly in 1982 at the age of 84, having lived to see his discoveries form the foundation of modern material science. His obituary in the Times made only brief mention of his wartime service, noting that he had contributed to metallurgical research that aided the Allied war effort. The full extent of that contribution, the thousands of lives saved, the battles turned, the war shortened, remained largely unknown to the public. But among the dwindling community of World War II tank veterans, the name Wyndham was spoken with reverence. As former Sergeant Mike Collins told his grandchildren decades later, there were 2 types of heroes in that war, the ones who stood in front of cameras with medals on their chests, and the quiet ones who worked in laboratories and workshops. Sometimes I think the second kind saved more lives. In the technical archives at Shoeburyness, now primarily a historical repository, the original Tiger armor plate still exists, the small sections removed for testing clearly visible. Beside it lies a copy of Wyndham's handwritten notes from those 72 crucial hours in March 1943. The final page contains a simple observation that changed the course of armored warfare. The strength of their armor contains the secret of its weakness. The story of Edgar Wyndham and his team represents a different kind of battlefield heroism, not the courage to face enemy fire, but the intellectual bravery to challenge established thinking when lives depend on the outcome. In the underground laboratory at Shoeburyness, armed with microscopes rather than guns, they found a vulnerability that all the might of Allied artillery had missed. The greatest irony of Wyndham's discovery lay in its simplicity. The Germans, in their pursuit of armor supremacy, had overlooked a basic principle of metallurgy that any first-year engineering student would recognize, that hardness without flexibility creates brittleness. Their production process, optimized for manufacturing speed and hardness metrics, created armor that excelled in standard tests but failed under the specific conditions of actual combat. This oversight stemmed not from ignorance, but from the pressures of wartime production and the German tendency toward perfectionism in isolated categories rather than systemic resilience. They had created the perfect armor for the wrong war, optimizing for single high-velocity impacts when the battlefield reality included multiple, sustained hits. In this lies perhaps the most profound lesson of Wyndham's work, that victory in war, as in science, often belongs not to those with the most impressive specifications on paper, but to those who best understand the complex real-world conditions in which those specifications must perform. The Tiger tanks, engineering marvels of their day, were ultimately defeated not by bigger guns or thicker armor, but by a deeper understanding of how materials behave under stress. The quiet work of observation and analysis, work that rarely makes headlines or earns medals, proved more powerful than the thundering guns and roaring engines that dominate our images of war. So when we remember the heroes of World War II, perhaps we should spare a thought for those like Edgar Wyndham, the scientists and engineers whose battlefields were laboratories and workshops, whose weapons were knowledge and insight, and whose victories were measured not in territory gained, but in lives saved. Would you have recognized the significance of those microscopic crystal formations? Would you have had the courage to challenge military doctrine based on what you saw? And when the pressure of lives hanging in the balance weighed on your decisions, would you have trusted your science over established wisdom? The answers to these questions define a different kind of courage, one that deserves recognition alongside the more visible bravery of the battlefield. Share this story so others may remember that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes victory belongs not to the strongest armor, but to the keenest minds that find its hidden weaknesses.